Hello, welcome. My name is Stephen Kittner. This is an introduction to SolidWorks modeling, part 3, sketching. In this session, I will show you how to create your first SolidWorks sketch. We will use planes and something called the origin to position our sketch. We will introduce sketch relations. I will then show you how to fully define your sketch using dimensions and relationships. Okay, so with a new window open, a new part, we are going to go to the Sketch tab on our top ribbon, toolbar ribbon, and if we look across the line, the very first icon says Sketch. If you hover over that icon, it says that this will create a new sketch or edits an existing sketch. So we're going to click on that icon first. This now opens up this plane view where you can see we have a front view, a top view, and a right view. So in SolidWorks, these are called planes, and you can consider them as pieces of paper that are floating somewhere in a three-dimensional space. So basically, these planes allow us to create a sketch, a two-dimensional sketch at any point in our 3D space. So in this instance, I'm going to hover over the top plane until it goes orange, and then I'm going to do a left mouse click to select the top plane to create our first sketch. Okay, did you see the sketch plane rotate out of view? Now, if we look down our tree, we can see that we now have sketch 1, which is sat just underneath this grey line. Up in the top right hand corner, we also now have that same sketch icon that we had at the top of here with this little arrow attached, and we also have an X button. Once we've finished with our sketch and we want to keep it, we need to ensure that we hit this button here to exit the sketch, and you can see the same buttons over here as well, and that will do exactly the same. Just a word of caution, if you hit the X, it will delete your sketch. So that's very rare that you'll end up hitting that X. So please don't hit the X to exit the sketch. The button on top is to exit your sketch. Okay, the other thing to note is now we have this double red arrow in the middle of our screen. This double red arrow is called the origin. Now the origin is extremely important in SolidWorks for reasons I will show you now. Okay, so I'm going to go up and pick a corner rectangle sketch icon and hit a left mouse button. You can see now that we have some different types of rectangles that we can create. We're going to use the corner rectangle for this one, and then we have a parameters box. This parameters box is useless, so please ignore it. Okay, so now if I hover my mouse on the main sketching window, you can see that the rectangle is attached to my cursor. What I'm going to do is draw two separate rectangles by holding down the left mouse button and dragging my mouse, and then I'm going to let go. And this time I'm going to hover over the origin. Can you see the little yellow icon that's popped up? That's called a sketch relation, and I'll talk about those in a moment. So this one's going to be attached to the origin and it will snap when you're close. I'm going to again hold the left mouse button down, click and drag and let go. Okay, now we are finished with the rectangle tool. So whenever you're finished with the tool in SolidWorks, you've always got to confirm that you finished with it. So there's a little tick up here, or you can hit the escape button. Okay, looking at our two rectangles, what can you notice that's different about them? Well, they both have four sides. They both have these little green symbols on each of the sketch elements. Now these green symbols are called sketch relations. Now if we look at this one and hover over it, you can see that this has a vertical relationship for line 4, which means that if I try and drag that line, or even the corner points of that line, I cannot move that line out of its vertical relationship. If I select it and hit delete, and now I drag a corner, now I can take it out of its vertical relationship and create an angle. So relationships are very important to help us define what we want our sketch to be. So to add that relationship back in, I'm going to hover over the line, I'm going to do a left mouse click, and I'm going to select make vertical from the pop-up that comes here, or over in the properties box I can also make vertical here. That will then add that relationship back in. So on the rectangle over this side, there are two differences. Firstly, we have this little icon here, which is another sketch relation, which is the sketch relation that we put in when we hovered over the origin, and it's called a coincident. And a coincident is a join. So what we've done here is joined up the corner of our rectangle to the origin. And again, if I select it and hit delete and get rid of it, I can now drag and move that around. And if I go near the origin, it will snap and it will put the relationship back in. Now when I go and drag that part, it doesn't move. It's fixed. The point is fixed in that space to the origin. So the other difference that we have is that these two sketches are black. Now these two sketches are black because they are defined sketches. They're fixed somewhere in space. If I click on it and try to drag it, it will not move. However, if I click and drag on this blue sketch, the blue sketch will move, because at the moment the blue sketch is not fixed. Now what's fixing this black line at the bottom here is the relationship to the origin. Okay, so I want to make this a defined size. So we now need to add a dimension. And if I add a fixed dimension from this line to this line, then this line is not going to be able to move. And we are going to define it in a position. So I'm going to go back up to my sketch toolbar. The second icon in it is called Smart Dimension. I'm going to click on the Smart Dimension, and this tool now, when I hover back over the sketching page, you can see that there's a dimension icon attached to my cursor. Now, the Smart Dimension tool is pretty smart. It will guess what you want to do. 9 out of 10 times it will give you the right type of dimension that you want, and if it doesn't, you can always come and hit this little grey arrow and you can select the dimension that you would like to use. So what I'm going to do is hover. I'm going to hover over this horizontal line and it goes orange, and I'm going to click on that orange line, and now it's going to give me a dimension for that line. Now the first dimension that we put in SolidWorks is a critical one because it will scale the whole sketch according to that first dimension that you put in. So at the moment I've done one left mouse click and now I've got this dimension attached. Now what I'm going to do is just scroll down underneath where the line that I want the dimension on. Now here's a little tip for you. If you leave it sat over the top or you leave it inside, once you start getting multiple dimensions, then it can become quite clustered. So I like to bring mine down quite far and out of the way of everything else. And once it's in the position I want it to be in, I'm going to hit the left mouse button again, and that's going to drop the dimension into its position, and it's going to give me a pop-up for this modified box. Now the modified box is going to allow me to type in a value, so I don't even need to press delete to get rid of the other one because it's already highlighted, and I'm going to make the size of this rectangle 50 millimeters. Now again, I can select the units down here. However, if we just look down in the corner here, I've got this mmgs symbol, and that tells me that I'm working in millimeters, grams and seconds, and I'll show you how to change that in a second. So I don't even need to type in millimeters. I'm just going to do 50 and hit enter, and now it's changed that dimension and it's scaled the rest of the drawing to suit. Now what's changed on our sketch? Well, now although I dimension this line, this position of this line is now fixed. Because the length of this line cannot change, this line can now not move left or right. So I'm just going to hit escape to come out of the dimension tool, and we'll go back into it in a second. I'm going to click on the line. Now I cannot move it. Okay, and again, be careful that when a line is selected, you get the light blue as opposed to this darker blue when the sketch is undefined. So I'm just going to click anywhere in the space, and now you can see that it's fixed. Ooh. Okay, so now I'm going to set another smart dimension, and this time I'm going to set the dimension of this line here, and I'm going to set that to 30 and hit enter. And now when I hit escape to come out of the dimension tool, now you can see that this whole sketch has gone black, and this whole sketch is now considered to be fully defined. There is no point on this sketch that I can click and drag and move anything about. It is fixed in its space. What if I wanted to change the dimension? So if I wanted to change the dimension, I'm going to click on this dimension here. I'm going to double click, and now the modify box comes back up, and I can type in my new dimension and it will resize it for me. I also mentioned that we can change the units that we use as default, and if you highlight over the bottom box down here, click on the little arrow, it will give you a couple of different options for what you want to use. Let's now go and put some dimensions, the same dimensions, onto this rectangle. And I'm just going to move the scale. There we go. So I've put exactly the same dimensions on this rectangle as I have this one. However, this one is not fixed at all. Now, although I cannot change the size of the rectangle, I can change its position, and that is because we've not attached it to this origin in some way. So now, if I wanted to, I can drag that onto the origin, let it go, and now that whole sketch is also gone fully defined. I'm just going to hit Ctrl Z because that's not what I want, and in fact I'm now going to select that whole sketch and I'm going to delete it. I'm going to delete everything to do with the sketch. So there we go. Now I've created a fully defined sketch with two dimensions for this rectangle. It's attached to the origin. We've used the sketch relationship coincident. We've also got the sketch relations horizontal and vertical used, and we're now ready to convert this two-dimensional sketch into a three-dimensional object. So there we go, you've just created your first SolidWorks sketch. We've used the relationships effectively to help define our sketch, and then we've used smart dimensions to ensure that the sketch is fully defined. Using the origin is the most important thing within your first sketch. Once you've done the first sketch, it doesn't matter, but the first sketch must utilize the origin. Okay, that is the biggest thing you need to take away from this session. Now you've created this two-dimensional sketch and it's fully defined and all your sketch lines are black and they cannot be moved, they're all fixed. The next video will show you how to create that sketch, take that two-dimensional sketch and create a three-dimensional object in SolidWorks. Don't forget to take the test on the next slide, and if you need to go back and revisit any of this PowerPoint, then please do so and ensure you understand these basics of sketching before you move on.